Hello and welcome to the Under Center podcast. I'm your host, Armar, and I'm joined by two members of the editing team for Zack Snyder's Justice League, Fionn Malloy and Jake Woolhead. Lads, I love the movie. It was a nice redemption story, but 4 hours? Could we not have cut down just a little bit?
Well, you're obviously
both said it was 8.
Yeah. Then we had a big, long discussion about it, and we thought 4 was a fair number. There's a lot of garbage in the film, but 4 hours is thought.
We figured if people could sit through a Jacksonville Jaguars game, they could sit through 4 hours of our movie.
I was going to say, do you not think when the movie was longer than a game of football, you could have thought, okay, maybe it's a little too long?
Well, we threw in the yellow flag, but there was no penalty on that one.
There was no halftime show even in the movie. Come on. Limited ad breaks too, but sure. This week we are going to actually be taking a break from our off-season series, and we're going to be talking a lot about free agency. You could call it a free agency extravaganza, and for such a big show we've needed some big guests. So on this week's show we are delighted to be joined by Colum, Cronin and Brian O'Leary from the Irish NFL Show. Lads, it's great to have you on.
It's great to be here. I was getting a bit worried there when we start with movies because, as Colin well knows, when we discuss movies on our show, I quickly tail off because movies and me don't go hand in hand. So thank you for getting back to the sport at hand and a busy free agency period.
Yeah, delighted to have the opportunity to come on and chat to you lads. And yeah, what a first kind of wave of free agency that we have just come to the end of, and plenty to discuss.
Definitely, for sure. And don't worry, Brian, that is the last time we're going to reference a movie throughout this whole show. I promise.
That's just you. I've scribbled out half my notes here. All movie references.
Before we actually get into talking about free agency, if you are watching this on YouTube, could you please like this video and subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network? That is where you're going to find our podcast each and every week. Also search for the Dynamo Podcast Network wherever you get your podcasts in audio form, whether that be on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify. If you haven't already this week, check out our other show that we have. We released a special where I got the chance to speak to Brett McCormick, where we spoke about the docuseries Return Man that he created, which looks at the life and mysterious death of Super Bowl V winner Jim Duncan, I should say. So check that out after this show if you are in the mood to. It's a great story and definitely well worth checking out. So let's talk free agency. We are just over a week in, and we could probably say most of the big names have been taken off the board. Jake and Brian, I'm actually going to start with you because you are Giants fans, because we haven't spoken since the other moves that the Giants made over the week, which is, of course, Kenny Golladay and Adoree Jackson signing to the team. So, Jake, with you first, what have you made of the moves?
Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted. I've loads of reasons to be delighted. Kenny Golladay, we have now a number one receiver that Danny Dimes can drop them dimes into the bucket for him. But this is a big year for Danny now, because now he has no excuse, barring the O-line's progression. But we give him, he has no excuse. Saquon's going to come back strong, going to have a number one receiver. So if he continues to have problems, then we'll know a little bit more about Daniel. And then also Adoree Jackson, that's fantastic because, and Brian, I'm sure you agree, is Patrick Graham loves to run like these kind of man coverage so they can blitz heavy in from the defense. And now we have a cornerback on the other side of James Bradbury that can handle his own instead of the rotating carousel of cornerback 2 that we had going.
Yeah, and you look at the cornerback stats in the Giants last year, it was so distorted because Bradbury was up in the top 10 of all the players. And then you look at the rest of them, they were literally off the charts for all the wrong reasons. But yeah, to the point, Graham on his defensive schemes, he likes fast, adaptable players, can play man, play blitz. Adoree Jackson, we were all hung up on the Kenny Golladay story all weekend, and imagine myself and Jake were continuously scrolling and refreshing, waiting to get that news. But the Adoree Jackson one kind of creeped up on us because it came out late Friday night that he was coming in for a visit, and I was, oh my God, straight away, that's a stand-up cornerback in his own right in terms of potentially being a number one. Unfortunately, last year were injuries, but to have what we're calling now a cornerback on the other side, which we really need, makes the defense even stronger. And to the Golladay one, there's a lot of people who don't think Golladay is a number one receiver. Personally, even on our show, myself and Colum have discussed, I said it a couple of weeks ago, for me, he was the most intriguing player that the Giants could go after. I didn't think we'd get him, more so for reasons around the Leonard Williams contract, because myself and Jake touched base last week. Up to Wednesday night last week, the Giants hadn't done a thing. I know it was only like a couple of hours into free agency, but bearing in mind the tampering period starts on Monday. But it was all down to the Leonard Williams contract. We needed to get under the cap in order to start making signings. And for the Leonard Williams contract to get done, that was actually the first domino that allowed them to start kind of pursuing players. But to get Golladay in, people today are kind of querying the 18 million a year. It's stretched out over 4 to 5 years. There's a big upfront signing. We had to go and do it. And people are saying we've overpaid, but what's the alternative? Because the Giants are lacking in receivers. And another one which is floating under the radar is Kyle Rudolph. I think that's a really good pickup. I honestly didn't think to go from. Evan Ingram is inconsistent. The amount of times he cost us last year in games, he is a good tight end, but he just doesn't seem to make the plays that we expected of him because he was highly thought of coming out of draft. So to get Kyle Rudolph in, a blocking tight end as much as a good red zone tight end, I think that's also a huge one. But one final piece on the Giants for me is this draft coming up now allows the Giants to go in so many positions. It's probably the first time in 6 years they could address a position based on the best player available. Like last year, it was offensive line. Year before that, quarterback. Year before that, running back. And it was kind of very evident what they were going to go for. But this year, the flexibility is there now to literally take whoever falls to them. And they're in a position where teams could trade up, because if the quarterbacks don't come off the board as quickly as people think, and a team like the Patriots at 15 need to move up to get a quarterback, Giants are in a nice position now to potentially drop back, take a player, and still couldn't get the player they need.
Yeah, it's crazy because when I was looking at when I seen this Adoree Jackson thing come in, I was thinking, like, when I first read it, it was before the Golladay signing. So I was thinking maybe if the Golladay signing backfires, we'll get ourselves cornerback too, pick 11, we can go playmaker then. But then we signed Golladay. I thought, oh, that Adoree Jackson's kind of just like have him in for dinner and let him go off. I think he was going to the Eagles next or something like that. Then they brought in the heavies, Logan Ryan and Darnay Holmes, and they all started courting Adoree Jackson, and it must have worked 3 years, I think $39 million. And now, as you said, Brian, that really opens up the draft because you can trade back, you can go best player available, you can shore up a lot of our weaknesses that we've had for even a long time now. Yeah. But it's certainly, because if we got Golladay, I was thinking maybe cornerback or O-line. We got Golladay, maybe we could still go cornerback, but then we got Jackson, so it's just wide open now. I'm really, like, this is the first draft. I'm really excited to look what's coming.
It's probably the first year, and I know we're not even out of March yet, but it's probably the first year going into a season. Like last year, I think it was more about just see how Joe Judge is. He's a first time head coach. A lot of people knew a lot about him. I think he was quick to say that the team have bought into him, even in the off season, leading into training camp, he was going to get him challenged around his methods of doing things, making players run laps. But I think it's evident over the past 2 weeks, the players in which they've signed, that people do want to play for him. And I think we're in a very strong position, albeit very early in the off season, going into the next season.
Yeah, Fionn, and I'll start with Colum first. What did you make of the Giants' moves this week?
I suppose Brian is talking about some of us having doubts around Golladay. I don't doubt that he's a very good receiver. I just don't think he's Allen Robinson good. And I'm wondering, also, do any of you want to join my free Allen Robinson campaign? Because I think it's an abomination that the Bears were able to tag that guy. He should just go elsewhere. But I think Golladay is a very good player. And I see some parallels, right, in that there is now no excuses for Daniel Jones. And I say this as a Broncos fan with Drew Lock, and we may or may not get to that, but you've now given him that WR1, right? You have Saquon coming back. He's in his third year. The excuses are gone. The Bears brought in Allen Robinson. It exposed Mitch Trubisky. So we now get to see what Daniel Jones is capable of. And that's the interesting thing. And I mean, I think so. You've got other teams in similar situations. It could be that is it Trubisky they're very different players, but does it allow Jones to take a sort of a jump that we saw with Josh Allen in the Bills and bringing in Diggs, and then you put the pieces around him. So to me, that's an intriguing one. To see what will happen there. And I think we talk a lot about this league being a copycat league, but the Josh Allen situation with the Bills has convinced everyone that your third year, your young QB. This is where they're going to make the jump. I mean, the Broncos seem to be going all in on Drew Lock to do the same thing. It will work in some instances. It won't work in others. I'm intrigued to see, what it does. I mean, look, I have affinity for the Giants as an organization, given that, they're the team that stopped the Patriots, and that was always good to see. So I would like for Brian's sake and other Giants that it does work out, but it will be one to keep an eye on, and it does remove the excuses. And if it doesn't work, like it the same probably at the Broncos, you're really back to find a new QB next year, and definitely question marks over the front office.
That's something that sorry, go on, Finn.
No, go ahead.
Just something I was thinking of. Like, say it all goes tits up, and Daniel Jones isn't the guy, but we still have some good players on longer deals, not hugely long deals, 3 and 4 years. So we get a rookie quarterback. He's already in a position where he can now succeed because he's not on a weak team anymore. He's got a good supporting cast around him, hopefully a good O-line and some good weapons that he can work around. So, like, it's a bad position to be put in, but hopefully you can see the light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah, Dara, I'm sitting here smirking. I think this is a great signing for the Giants, and the reason I think it's a great signing for the Giants is look at the two boys. Look how giddy they are. Do you remember, Jake, when we were talking to Jerry 2 weeks ago, and everything was dire, and they have one player now, and all of a sudden, the draft is wide open. We can address any holds everywhere. If I was the Giants, I'd be every pick you've got, pick a lineman just in case one of them's good, because you got to shuffle that thing all over the place. You had 12 passing touchdowns all season last year. That's a bigger hole than having one good wide receiver. So I love it because I'm just waiting. It's going to make the tears from Jake so much sweeter now that everything looks brilliant. Everything's amazing. We're one good move from this thing going to the Super Bowl. And 3 weeks in, I'm going to be sitting there laughing in my little Washington fan lair, watching them fall apart and going, but we signed Golladay. And I can't wait.
We might have one question on our QB, whether he's the guy or not. You have 3 QBs that we already know aren't the guy. So
that's the same question. Who's your second string QB?
We just signed Mike the Giraffe Glennon.
So you don't have, if Daniel Jones isn't your guy, you don't have any other guys either. You're in the same boat.
Mike Glennon. What's wrong with Mike Glennon?
Fitzmagic was brilliant last year.
Until he became Fitztragic. So
Fitzmagic was good to get Tua out of a hole when he was doing trouble, but now he has to be the main guy.
Yeah, now he's going to get the whole team out of a hole. No worries to him.
Okay, if you think so.
Are you guys familiar with the story about Peyton Manning and Peyton's backup? No. So the famous story where Gruden was going around doing his period, I guess, where he wasn't coaching, and he was asked in Indianapolis, Peyton's backup doesn't seem to take any snaps in practice. What's going on there? And they were told, guys, if 18 goes down, we're fucked, and we don't practice. Fucked. So your backup QB, you shouldn't want to know their name. Right? Ideally, you don't want to ever see them. Like the Chiefs have had a revolving door of backups. You never wanted to see them come in. The Bucs, you like with Brady, you don't care if you have two QBs, you've no QBs. So to me, and look, Washington are in a situation where they had to bring somebody in, but you never want to be in a situation where your backup QB's name, because something has gone very wrong. If that's the case, we're not in the situation where we used to be, where you had Steve Young backing up Joe Montana. Those days are long gone.
Fionn, that's the beauty of the off season. You're always winning the Super Bowl in March. And don't worry about draft picks next year for quarterback, because if it doesn't work out for Daniel Jones this year, there's a certain Russell Wilson that'll be getting out of his contract.
Oh, I see. Well, Jake, whatever you did to get Golladay over to the Giants, I'd start doing it again right now to try and get Russell Wilson.
I'm starting it.
Listen, don't bring my guy Russell Wilson into any of these conversations, right?
I can see Dara just squirming along there.
Don't, right? I've been through enough this off season already with this whole Bears stuff, and I don't need any more now. I know the rumors were there last year. I think Colin Carroll, I think he's like Russell's mouthpiece in the media when he can't talk. And he says, "Oh yeah, he wants to go to the Giants because Sierra likes New York." I know. Okay, let Sierra go to New York. Russ, you're playing in Seattle, so get over it.
On a Buffalo, so.
Buffalo. Well, speaking of Buffalo and backup QBs, let's mosey on over to Buffalo, who have got a rookie QB who we all know the name of, and that's Mitch Trubisky, who is going to be backing up Josh Allen. Now, we saw the development of Allen under Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll over the last few years, especially, like you said, third year, he made that big jump. Is this going to be a similar thing for Trubisky, where he's going to learn under the tutelage of McDermott and Daboll for a year, try and improve, and then next year go to a team where he can be QB1 somewhere? I'll start with you, Colum, on this one.
Well, it's QB rehabilitation, essentially. You know, it hasn't worked out for him over the past 2 years in Chicago, and you know, everyone knew that he wasn't going to stick around in Chicago. It was obvious last season once they brought Foles in. So I think this probably suits everyone. He's not going to play. Like he's only there in case Allen gets injured, and in that case he can come in. And they have some similar traits in mobility. So when you bring him in, and a guy who has played in the league, and he's $2.5 million, which the Broncos played to Jeff Driscoll last year. So I mean, the cost is nothing to have him there. There's never going to be a QB competition. It's never going to be the case the fans are going to call for him to go in no matter how Allen plays, and that's always your concern with a backup as well. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. He goes there, he rehabilitates for a year, and look, this is a league where QBs, if you have any sort of record, people will roll the dice and try and take a flyer on you. So I imagine he does a year there. Even if he never sees the field, the hope is that it puts enough distance between what we saw on tape, the bad at the Bears, and somebody next season. The way in which, like, Andy Dalton, I didn't feel did anything at the Cowboys, but he increased his salary tenfold, and he's now starting with the Bears. So I assume that is what we're, what Mitch Trubisky is hoping for. I just don't know if he's ever going to be a real caliber, like a starting caliber QB in the league. I know people will try it. I just don't think it'll ever really work.
Yeah, the thing about like quarterbacks that are drafted within the top 10 or 15 is they'll always have a chance on some teams somewhere. Somebody's going to give them peanuts just to sit on the bench and hold a clipboard and look pretty. But we all know a lot. We can all see Mitch Trubisky's talents did not lie in throwing the football or reading a defense, or what was it? He couldn't throw to his left-hand side properly or something ridiculous like that. We know he's not starting material, but like Colum, you had a good point. He is at least somewhat similar, and he has some athletic traits like Josh Allen has. He can run the ball. He can get you those scrambling first downs and stuff. So worst comes to worst, you have an extra running back on the Bills there.
We had Nate Geary on from Buffalo on our show last Friday night. He reports for the Buffalo Bills, and he made a very funny comment. He said, when Josh Allen runs, he doesn't give up on a play. In fact, he wants to tackle the defensive player. So the Bills are kind of conscious that the more he runs, he's putting himself in a situation where he could come out of a game or get injured or get a concussion. And the quarterback, Barkley, who's been the backup for a couple of years, he's a Colt McCoy scenario. He's just not effective enough to come in and run that offense. So as much as people kind of have a downward turn on how Mitch Trubisky has played over the last few years, he's still athletic enough to play in that formation and in that offense for the team. So if he's called upon a 1-2 game scenario, he could potentially get them wins, but the longevity, it's not going to happen. But he's not a bad backup to have. And I do think what will happen next year is you'll get desperate teams who they come middle of the pack and they just know that the quarterbacks in the draft aren't going to be there for them. It's too far a reach for them to get up to the top 10. And they'll look at Trubisky and say, you know what, maybe we'll take a flyer on him for a year, similar enough to what the Bears are doing now, ironically enough, with Dalton and I suppose Washington to a certain extent with Fitzpatrick, 1 year flyers. And that's probably what Trubisky will get next year again with some other team that needs a quarterback.
Yeah, look, I think the lads are being a little bit generous here. I think Trubisky is going to go the way of Mariota as opposed to the way of Dalton. I think them two should split a Netflix account, sit down on the bench for the next 4 or 5 years. They'll get their money's worth watching on the tablets. They won't get a starting job. They won't get many snaps at all over the next few years. And he'll be held around because, again, he was this first-round talent. There is some evidence somewhere on some video that the man can play football, and you'd rather do that than some low level like a Colt McCoy or even a 6th, 7th round draft pick. So you'll always believe that there's a chance if he comes in, he can do something magical and lead a comeback and spark his career up again. But I just don't see that chance ever happening. I think he's going to be along the veins of guys like Mariota that we've seen before, that once they lose that job, they never really get close to getting back on the horse.
And that's just the point in the Bears last year. They're the first team in NFL history to lose 6 games in a row and still go to the playoffs, and they turned it around in the second part of the season. But that's consistent when Trubisky came back in. So for all his flaws, they did win a lot of games towards the back end of the season, and they put up high points. So I know he's got Robinson there, and Colum is #1 fan club for Alan Robinson, but like he did have players there, and when he got going towards the end of the season, he was effective enough, but the inconsistencies and interceptions really are what turned you off from being your starting quarterback.
Just as a side note, Fionn, you can't beat this in Colt 45. He beat Dara's Seahawks somewhat admirably by not taking risks and handing the ball off to the running back.
Dara's Seahawks beat Dara's Seahawks that day. It wasn't the New York Giants.
Actually, it was Patrick Graham. That's who defeated the Seahawks.
It was, and the lack of being able to adapt in a game rather than just trying to throw the moon ball in every play. So, but
they actually said that was the first game last season where Wilson snapped in terms of getting fed up with the offensive line just not protecting him, because he was sacked 6 or 7 times in that game, and that was the game where he came off afterwards and said, "We need to address this." And look, it wasn't addressed towards the end of the season because it was too late in the day, but it needs to be addressed now. And then Gabe Jackson has come in. He's a decent defensive tackle, but no 1st round pick. How did they address it?
Well, they've re-signed almost everyone on their offensive line, so the same offensive line protected apart from Gabe Jackson. So that's how it works. They got Gabe Jackson in because Mikey Potty has retired, so that's why they brought him in. But look, we'll see. There's the depth at center, especially in the draft this year, is quite good, so they could get themselves a decent center even in the 2nd round. I still think there's going to be a trade or two to happen before the draft to get them more picks. Keep an eye out for someone like Tyler Lockett to get moved on, because
Russell Wilson will probably get a few pretty picks.
Well, look, if they can't get Russell Wilson,
Tyler Lockett's worth a 1st rounder.
I think they might get a 2nd rounder for him. They wouldn't get a 1st rounder, no, but they might get a 2nd round for him.
Metcalf might get you a 1st rounder if you want to get rid of him.
He would, but I think he's kind of all right. I think we might keep it around for one more year in Seattle.
No one protecting Wilson and no one for him to throw to. Will be literally just scrambling around for 15 minutes at a time.
That's what he did in his first few years, and it worked out pretty well.
I mean,
it's coming choice.
You gotta hope he can do it again, so.
Yeah, we can do it again. But just on the Mitch Trubisky thing, I think you guys are a little unfair to Mitch. I think he is going to get a starting job. He's going to get a starting job for the Houston Roughnecks in the XFL once that's all set up. I think that's the perfect landing ground for someone like Mitch. But we'll look in at some of the other AFC East sides, and we'll go quickly on them. And obviously the Patriots, one of the busiest teams in this offseason, just to name a few: Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Jalen Mills, Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar. A lot of players. Interesting enough, though, and keep it under the QB topic, Cam Newton is going to be there next season. Like, is he going to be the man to under center that's going to get this team back to where, obviously, Patriots fans feel they belong? Fiona, I'll start with you on that one.
I mean, I think it's going to be difficult. We spoke a little bit about this when we had Gary on, and I agreed with your take a lot. I do think he's not going to be as bad as he was last year. He's definitely going to take a step forward. And I think that New England have put a lot of a lot of good players around him. Some of the moves that they made are a little bit head scratching, particularly on defense. But I think they have a chance of being better. Will they be anywhere close to what they were with Brady? Absolutely not. I think Patriots fans really have to readjust their thinking. It's going to be a long, hard, slow climb to get anywhere back. But one thing I did find interesting about New England, despite all the players that they signed, they spent money on those players as well. Like I have here that of all the players they signed, 8 of those players are playing for over $5 million a year. That's a big investment in some of those players. So I think they should expect a big upturn. Now, whether they'll get that, I don't know. But based on money only, I think they should expect to play better.
Yeah, like a lot of the big signings they have, it's kind of just no excuse for me with Cam Newton now, because you've got some good blockers in the tight end, some good pass catching as well there. So it's hard for them. They get Joe Thuney as well back. So it's hard for me to think.
No, Joe Thuney's gone to the Chiefs. It was Andrews that came back.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
David Andrews.
Yeah. So I just don't see an excuse anymore for Cam. I didn't nobody thought he played well, but in my the back of my head here, I'm thinking this is a Bill Belichick master plan. Put no players around Cam Newton last year, let him suck, and then this year he'll turn it back on. They've all these players, all this money. I mean, it's not gonna happen, but I just have it here. That's what's in the back of my head. I think? Huh?
Jake, Aguilar thrives on accuracy and Cam Newton also thrives on accuracy. So they're a match made in heaven.
Yeah, but is it going to happen? Like, can you see Cam carrying them to a Super Bowl? Like, he's been there before, but I don't see him doing it next year for sure.
I can see him being carried off on a stretcher.
Yeah, and just reflecting on that Super Bowl, and Colum knows well, it probably wasn't the Super Bowl as much, but more the Week 1 game the following season where the Broncos played the Panthers again. Ever since that game, Cam has been a broken man, because that Broncos defense demoralized him in the Super Bowl and did pretty much the same in Week 1. But he hasn't been the same quarterback since. I read a few reports this week. People are saying if they're in the Cam Newton camp, and they're saying, well, sure, look, he only signed for the Patriots on July the 4th last year, but there was no training camps last year. There was no mini camps leading up to the season. You know, everybody was in the same position, so can't really buy that. And then he got the COVID, and he didn't really come back from that and play effectively for the rest of the season. But even when he came back, and after a couple of weeks, you could see his arm strength was just falling off. It wasn't the player that we've seen over the years. I don't think he's in a position to bring the Patriots forward, even with all the players they've signed. And if they don't get someone in the draft, I wouldn't say it's going to be a waste of season, but I think they will be in the round of 7 and 9, 8 and 8 kind of, because once you have all these players, and we touched on it even with the Giants and other teams and Denver, for example, you can have all the players and you can have great wide receivers and great tight ends, but if you don't have a quarterback who can play effectively, you're not going to go anywhere. I think they will draft a quarterback, but again, I'm not sure whether the ones that they want, in a sense, will drop to them, because there's 4 that will go off the board potentially in the top 10. They're at 15. I could see them trading up. I think it's a backup plan, and if they get the guy they want, but Belichick again, they didn't trade him for him till July. I could see something May, June where they go off and reevaluate and bring in another quarterback, at least to challenge Cam and see in training camp if he's up for the job.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what they're paying Cam, they're not paying huge money. So to me, bringing Cam back was kind of a safety valve in some respects. Cam has never been the same. That Super Bowl where he winces back, he doesn't go, like, how are you ever going to trust him again after that? And then he got absolutely annihilated in that Week 1 game the next week. Some of that was deliberate targeting, and I say that as a Broncos fan, but that 1-2 punch, he just never ever has come back from that, and I don't think it's fixable. The issues, I think, when you look at, say, what we've seen in free agency over the years, the teams that have been successful is where you have a franchise QB in place, and then you can spend big. The Broncos did that with Peyton Manning. We've seen the Bucs do that last year, obviously, with Brady. If you don't have a QB in place, you end up being the Jets and the Jaguars. You spend all this money, it doesn't go anywhere. I like some of the moves that the Patriots have made. I think bringing in 2 tight ends, we've seen Belichick have huge success with that in the past. The Aguilar one is somewhat, that to me is the real head scratcher. You're paying the guy like 11 million. He was 1 million last year, and I think the Raiders went and got John Brown for about 3. I don't understand that, but Robert Kraft seems to have bought into it. He was on Peter King. He was talking about, I think it was exploiting a market inefficiency because so many teams weren't able to compete. But you would have to say that while some of the guys they brought in were top level, the others, you know, how much competition was there really going to be for the wide receivers that they brought in? I would agree with Brian. I think they're going to look to the draft, but I think they would have had eyes on Mac Jones. They're probably going to have to give up some capital to do that. Will they be willing to? I think they'd be wise to, because I think if you run this back with Cam, you have wasted a huge amount of investment. And again, if you break it down, it is a lot of investment, particularly this year and next year. It drops off dramatically after that. They've get outs, but you know, why invest all that in Cam? I don't see it. You know, Bill Belichick obviously might see something, but to me, it's more of a safety blanket bringing him back.
Can I throw this scenario at you guys then? Because I know we've mentioned that they're in 15. They're probably not going to be getting the quarterback that they want at 15. But what if they use some of these new signings as collateral for trades to trade up in the draft?
I was just thinking that right there myself. Like, that is one of the things that they could do to be moving up, have all these players and ship them off, get the draft pick and get up and get someone like Mac Jones, depending on where he could be drafted. Like, that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, would they even be willing to ship Cam Newton? I'm not sure.
Well, not even Cam. They have 2 tight ends there. They can get, like, everyone's obviously talking about they're going with the 2-headed attack that they had a couple of years ago with Gronk and Hernandez, but they could just easily use one of them to draft up, because they are 2 really good quality tight ends that I'm sure there's a lot of teams out there probably ahead of them in the draft too that could use them.
I'd imagine there's a couple of players on the roster from last year who they drafted. Like, if you ask any Patriots fan, the reason why they're in this position is because they just haven't drafted well for a number of years. I imagine there's 2 or 3 players that are, you know, I suppose to be used in parting gifts to move up. I'd be surprised if they were to trade a player in, sign a player in as part of free agency only to move them on so quickly. I think to be a commitment of some sort in the contracts that's not feasible. But wouldn't surprise me to see players go in any kind of deal. I don't think they'll have to jump too far either. Like, they're at 15. I'd imagine if they got up to where the Broncos are at 9, something along those lines, they could potentially. Colum said to me time and time again that he can see a scenario now, especially as the Broncos have done so well defensively in free agency, where they could drop back a couple of positions. And I'd say 15 to 9 would do the job.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is, comes back to what I mentioned at the start. I think the thing that would stop any major trades happening is just some of the money that these guys are on, that they've signed over $5 million a year. That's a big investment. Like, you want those players to be in the top range at each of those positions, outside of maybe quarterback or really stud players. Like, that's quite a lot of money to pay for these guys. So guys like Aguilar, Mills, the 2 tight ends, they're on very big money. And I don't know, if no team was willing to go and sign them in free agency, I don't know who's willing to take those contracts on through trade either.
Just sorry, one more point. Do you know in the past where the combine is on, and that's really where the negotiation period kind of starts, you know, in the background, teams are kind of sussing out players. There's a kind of story going around today that Belichick was fortunate to be given certain snippets of information from agents in advance in terms of what kind of deals they need to offer players in order to get the deal over the line, because the amount of players that were signed on the day one in terms of the tampering period, you know, just provisionally agreeing agreements to go to the Patriots. The story's kind of out there that the Patriots were going to give an award to the boys in terms of what they needed to get to. Another Bill Belichick masterstroke or cheating, whatever way you want to look at it.
It wouldn't be unbeknownst to him anyway.
Well, sure, getting there ahead of everyone else. The tampering period before the tampering period, that's what we'll call it then.
I'm sure it happens all around the league.
Oh, definitely. These guys like are always in contact with each other, no matter what, whether it's agents or teams or whatever. They know. It just has to be done officially, just for everyone else so they don't go too mental. But let's look at some of the other AFC sides, and let's go to the AFC South, because a team that have signed actually more players than the Texans in this offseason is the Texans. And whether or not they're going to trade Deshaun Watson, we'll still wait and see if that finds out, because they have done their best to sort of load this team. Now, ideally enough, a lot of one-year deals, journeyman sort of players, and like these deals don't sort of stand out by themselves, but as a collective, you look at that and you can see that they are putting a lot of work in. For example, they've got two good running backs there now with Mark Ingram and Philip Lindsay, I should say, to join David Johnson, who's there now. Justin Britt, after taking a year out, is back playing. Tyrod Taylor, Christian Kirksey, Dante Moncrief. They are getting a good team together. And for David Culley in his first year as head coach, they are trying their best to put a competitive team together. Brian, I'll start with you. What did you think of the Texans' move this offseason?
Yeah, certainly floating under the radar. I actually was quite impressed with some of the deals. Like some of the players that they brought in, like they wouldn't be household names in terms of top 10, top 15 players in the league, but they'll do a job for you. Like Shaq Lawson has come in as well, defensive end with the Dolphins last year. Bills previously, you touched on the three running backs, all got great experience. It's a running back by committee scenario. Andre Roberts, wide receivers, come in from the Bills. Special teams player. We saw him last year, how effective he could be in terms of returning the ball off punts and stuff. And Tyrod Taylor, I imagine if Watson does get traded at some stage, he'll not likely would be the one that steps in, unless they get a trade where they bring in a quarterback as part of the deal. But again, Tyrod Taylor he's not, what you'd put as a top 20 quarterback in the league, and he didn't even get an opportunity to start last year because of the chaos that went on with the Chargers initially at the start of the season. But he can hold his own. He's played in the league, so they put enough players in there that, as you said, that they will be very competitive next year. But it's a tough division. You'd expect the Colts and Titans to be challenging. But the Watson saga is just going to, until that gets resolved, whether he's staying and whether he's going, all the other stuff that's going on outside of football, until all that is resolved, I thought people aren't going to really home in too much on what the Texans have done, because it's all about Deshaun Watson and whether they're going to keep him or trade him.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing in the air is the quarterback situation in the Texans. Like, if Deshaun is there, then all these moves are well and good. It's a strong running back room. We know Mark Ingram can play in a good committee with Philip Lindsay. Like, they're quality running backs that you have a good run game with them. They've got some decent wide receivers now that they picked up, not top tier, but certainly good players. My one was like with Tyrod, it was kind of like, it's an insurance policy for Deshaun in case he gets shipped off, but now it's even more so because of all these allegations against him. But I always have to feel bad about Tyrod, because wherever he goes, he's a backup, and then he's a starter, and then he kicks it off for another quarterback. He did it for Mayfield. He did it for Herbert. Well, through no fault of his own on that one with Herbert, but I certainly always feel bad for Tyrod Taylor now.
They've brought in loads, but half of that's because they've got no picks currently, so they had kind of had to fill up, on some. But the running back are the one thing I think I can look and say, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, because Ingram is up the gut, which is what Lindsay wanted to get away from. It made no sense. He's not built for that. Get him to the outside, and then he can do damage. But the rest, they're serviceable. But like, how do you attract fan? Like, it's Texas, so they're going to have open house. I mean, they will have all their fans back. But how do you get fans to go to that stadium? JJ Watt is gone. You don't know who your starting QB really is as we stand. To me, they needed a bit of excitement. The head coaching appointment doesn't fill me with a whole lot of confidence. That front office is a mess. To me, this was just kind of scattergun approach. It kind of sums up to me what the Texans have become over the last few years. Look, and a franchise that gave us Gary Kubiak and Wade spent time there, and gave the rest of the league a good laugh when they paid Brock Osweiler that money. But that seems to be the Texans appear to be the new Browns.
Yeah, I mean, the guys have nailed it. It's get in a load of middling players on decent money, There's a lot of them. 23 players signed in total. 16 of those are on 1-year deals. There's some guys, Pierre Lewis from Washington I'd be familiar with. And again, he's right along the veins of what all the guys have described, of this serviceable guy. He can play. He's not a star player. He's not going to be a captain or any of that stuff. I mean, he might be on this team full of journeymen, but he wouldn't normally be. He's not a standout guy. But look, he can play football. They're going to compete. They're not going to be blown out 0-16 or 17 or how many games we get this season. So I think they're well and truly in a rebuilding phase, and that to me suggests that, at least in their eyes, Watson is gone one way or the other.
Texans to me this year is kind of like the start of a new American football film where they get this ragtag bunch of players in, sign them on the contracts.
Mighty Ducks of the NFL.
Yeah, but it ain't going to end well.
Sorry for the movie talk, Brian.
It's not a tanking scenario. That's certainly not. What I would say is they brought in, like we've said, serviceable players and players that will be competitive. And you could see them being in a lot of games, but just not having enough to win them. So to be competitive, they won't win many games, but I certainly don't think it's a tanking situation.
I would warn the Houston fans. It looks eerily similar to Washington about 2-3 years ago, where it's just beige football. You're not terrible. You don't stink, but you just don't win games. You can't get it done right when you need to, and you just end up getting beat week after week. So it's going to be a tough watch for Houston fans this season.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. The acquisition of Tyrod Taylor, and they also got Ryan Finley from the Bengals, but you would assume that Tyrod Taylor would have enough to beat him out for the QB1 job, because I think what we've been told anyway is that whatever happens in this Deshaun Watson situation is that he won't be playing for the Texans again. I think we've heard that he would be even willing to sit out if he wasn't traded before obviously all this other stuff came up. So I think, yeah, they had to get a QB there. They're going to give him some things to throw to. They have some guys there to lighten the load in the running game. You know, the offensive line is still questionable at best. You know, you got a decent left tackle in Tunsil that you basically sold your house for anyway for him. So, you know, seeing on that defensive side, you know, other than JJ Watt, we were saying throughout all last season, what else have they got? Now they don't even have JJ Watt. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens there. Another team in the division, though, that have also been quite busy is the Jacksonville Jaguars with new coach Urban Meyer. Now, he complained last week, I don't know if you guys saw this, about having to sign players without meeting them. He wanted to be like the college days where he got to meet them before he signed them. But it hasn't stopped them from signing a lot of players. A lot of notable ex-Seahawk players as well, in Shaquille Griffin, Carlos Hyde, and Philip Dorsett. You can technically call him an ex-Seahawk player, even though he never played a snap for the team, but he was under contract. He also signed in the likes of Marvin Jones, Jamal Agnew as well, to give what we assume Trevor Lawrence some weapons when he is eventually drafted at the end of next month. On the Titans side, though, as well, I want to speak to, because they went all out to fix their pass rush issue from last year by getting Bud Dupree on a massive deal. And despite him coming off quite a serious injury. So, like with the acquisitions that the Texans have made, with the acquisitions that the Jaguars have made, and the Titans that have really probably only sort of looked at one position, where even though on that defense there was a lot of other issues last year as well, their corners were not the greatest, and they've already let go Malcolm Butler. So do the Titans need to now get a little more active in free agency to sort of make sure they can hold their position, if not top, at least in the top two of the AFC South? I'll start with you, Colum.
Yeah, I think they do. We talked about this on our show in terms of the Titans over the last couple of years have been kind of Jekyll and Hyde, because a couple of years ago their defense was really strong, and that's kind of what you looked at. But then last year they had all sorts of issues. You know, they're obviously Tannehill and Derrick Henry, you know, Tannehill kind of proving wasn't just a one season wonder. Henry's an interesting one because he puts up so many, like 2,000 yards, but like when he has a bad game, he is awful. Like, he's terrible, and he has really struggled against Vic Fangio defense. So I had joked on our show before the playoff game that they should give Vic Fangio a call and shut him down, and it appears they did that. To me, they've kind of had issues over the last couple of years in terms of cap space and having to cut guys, and which hasn't helped. And I think that they cut Jarrell Casey last year, and obviously got the injury and couldn't play for the Broncos. But I think that left a bad taste in the mouth in the dressing room. And I think that's one part of free agency that doesn't get talked about a lot. In the same way as we look at players in college, right? We look at what they do, but then that transition from college to the league and all the intangibles that are within that. Well, the same when you let guys go, and the chemistry that you get and the leadership that you lose. So I do think that they probably need to look at that. They have been trying as well for the last few years to get that pass rush together. You need a pass rush in this league to really take that next step, which is what they're trying to do. Todd Francis got all his guys paid now. Dak, Justin Simmons, Bud Dupree. And Dupree is probably the one I have a lot of questions of, because Dara, like you said, he's coming off that injury. And to me, he benefited from that system that the Steelers played. He got a lot of free runs there. He wasn't the guy who was getting double teamed. So I don't know. It might work out, but I would have questions there. And in terms then just on the Jaguars, welcome to the NFL, Urban. You are playing with the big boys now. I mean, we talk about like the transition for players, well, the transition for coaches. I look at the Jags. I like the Marvin Jones move. I like the Shaq Griffin, although it's a lot of money, but he is clearly very talented, but it is a lot of money. And the rest of it, Fiona, I think you used the term beige, or like, I don't see a whole lot of excitement. I presume they're planning all of that to come from Trevor Lawrence. But if you were looking to really make a splash in a name, and you had a lot of money going into free agency, I don't see a whole lot there. But look, it's all about Lawrence. It's all about that transition. You would, in theory, think that it should be no problem to him, but we have seen plenty of times in the past where, what was a sure thing isn't always the case. This looks like it will be. This looks like he should be fantastic, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, as Colum mentioned, they did spend big money on Griffin, but they also spent big money on two other defenders, the safety Jenkins and the defensive tackle Roberts Harris. Both of those guys, Jenkins is on 35 over 4 years, and Roberts Harris is on 23.5 over 3 years. So it seems like Urban Meyers, I've watched a little bit of the college football. I think he feels more comfortable about the offense. Ohio State always had a very potent offense on the college level. To me, it feels like he trusts his eye a lot on the offense and feels like, I'm going to draft. I have Lawrence, and I'm going to just draft him loads of these weapons, and I'm just going to make sure my defense is solid, because the Jaguars have been hammered by that division over the last couple of years. So I think he's trying to shore that up a little bit, and then say, my brilliant coaching eye is going to pick out some gems for the offense, and I don't really need to spend money. So I think it's a risky move, and I'm not sure it's going to work out for him, because also, as Colin mentioned, not all of those guys he spent money on are big name star players, or even guys you might have even heard of before. So that's a little bit head scratching for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of like in agreement with you two guys. The only one I liked was also Marv Jones. I'm not inspired by Urban Meyer at this point. What he's done so far has got me whelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not underwhelmed. I'm just whelmed about it. That's all I have to really say on the Jaguars, because until Trevor Lawrence comes in, until they get to the draft, and see who they pick up maybe in the second round, because we know who's number one. So who's the first pick of the second round? We have to find out these things, because I'm just not filled with confidence so far until Trevor Lawrence and whoever his new teammates are going to be. We'll have to see how they get on from that. And then on the Titan side of it, the Bud Dupree thing just had me kind of confused. I mean, like, that's a big contract to give to a guy that's coming off an ACL. Can he keep up what his production was? And I'm 100% agreeing with you, Colum, that he benefited greatly from being across from like great players. That was a solid D-line in Pittsburgh. So I don't think he's going to be that good. We'll see, but I certainly don't think it was a good fix for the Titans to be spending that much money on him.
It's very interesting, Jake, that you have concerns about a team giving a player a massive contract after
we don't need to go into it.
A whole year through injury.
We don't need to go into it. We don't need to go into it.
Darren, I was going to make the point, actually. What surprised me about the Bud Dupree situation was, I'm not surprised he got signed. I'm surprised that he got the money and he got the deal so quickly, because he wasn't brought in for any evaluation. The one thing about the Giants last week, in fairness to the Galdi, I know we're biased, but they brought him in for 3 days. You know, it wasn't just a case of bringing him in just to have the chat. They gave him the physical or medical, whatever you want to call it. So they evaluated him from a physical standpoint. Titans didn't do that with Bud Dupree. They literally, the deal was an offer. He took it, 15 million, sizable amount of money. They've been taking flyers for the past, say, 2 years. You know, they went Clowney last year. That was a flyer. It didn't work out. They were in the sweepstakes for JJ Watt. Like JJ Watt's a great player, but in fairness, if you look at his stats over the last 5 years, he had 5 sacks last year. He's only played in something like 35, 40% of the games over a 5-year period. He's not the player that everybody remembers, but yet the Titans are in for him. And the Titans secondary is completely demolished now. Jackson is gone, Butler released. I can't recall, there was one of them that was literally, I've seen a lot of Titans fans kind of dismayed by the fact that another cornerback was released. They're kind of saying, where's our secondary now? We're going to have to establish that in the draft. On the Jags, funny enough, was we talk about Moore being an offensively minded coach, his best 3 signings, or the general manager's best 3 signings, have actually been on the defense. I think Harris, who brought in from the Bears, defensive tackle, is very underrated. Jenkins is a solid player at the Saints, and Shaquille Griffin is a really good player. So I actually think their defense will improve. But again, to Colum and the guys' points, it's whether Lawrence can step up initially when he comes in, because it's not a foregone conclusion that he can step in from day one and be the quarterback that everybody's expecting. Maybe he will be in time, but certainly not at the start of the season.
Yeah. Well, just on the Griffin thing, it is a lot of money to pay him. And there was a lot of talk in Seattle saying that they were going to let him go anyway. Because of the money that he was going to ask for, they didn't believe that he was worthy of earning the money that a top cornerback would earn. He is a good player, but especially the last 2 years, have been too many times he's been beaten in coverage, or even simple go routes as well. He was known for his pace, but I don't know. He's had a lot of hamstring issues the last few years. So I think maybe a step has gone slightly. Great for him that he's back home and that he's going to be earning the money too. But in terms of a Seahawks side of things, it's not a massive loss. The addition of Weatherspoon instead, I think, is going to do well to, fill the gap left by Griffin there. But a few more teams I want to talk about on the AFC side very quickly. And Colum, you are a Broncos fan, of course, and I want to know what you've made of their free agency so far. You've kept Von Miller, you tagged Justin Simmons, and now you've just given him his new contract as well, and getting Kyle Fuller too on the defense, which is really good on that side of the ball. But one part of me feels that losing Lindsay is a big loss, and also the question marks around the QB still exist.
Yeah, so look, defensively, this team should be set up outside of linebacker, and they just brought Kareem Jackson back on a 1 year, $5 million deal. So your safeties are set. In theory, your cornerback should be set. I think that this is a team that overpaid for Darby, but I would say that the Kyle Fuller deal is really good. I mean, the year he had in 2018 with Fangio was phenomenal. Obviously, we'll look to replicate that. There's been all this talk all the time about Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, and the Broncos went big in terms of getting Chubb. He kind of fell to them. You wonder, was quarterback a better move? Should they have kept Shaq Barrett, gone quarterback? Things could look very different, but now they have Von Miller and Chubb. If both stay fit, then should have kind of 2 premier pass rushers. The D-line looks like it's pretty good. So defensively, outside of a speedy linebacker, we're pretty well set at the starters. the offense, yeah, that's where we've struggled and massively struggled now for 4 years. I mean, we haven't been above the 25th in terms of points scored in the past 4 years. That is, honestly, like there have been times where sandpapering my retinas would have been more enjoyable than watching the Broncos play offense. Three and out champs, absolute, no brainer. When Vance Joseph was there, you could put any money on it. Drew Lock has come in. He has flashed, particularly at the end of that first season. But last year, he gave the ball away so often. We then heard various bits and pieces. Yeah, a very young offense, but we heard bits and pieces around the speed of processing. That's a worry, because that, to me, more than anything, is what you need at QB. There's a reason, Brady has been so good for so long. It's not those physical traits, it's just how good he is at seeing the field. So can Drew Lock take that step? In terms of Lindsay, really sad to see him go, because he was the only thing that the Broncos had going in the 2018 season was Philip Lindsay. He was a real rallying point for fans, but this is under Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur. I'm yet to see any evidence that Pat Shurmur knows anything about offense, but because last year the Broncos did nothing other than beat the Jets. But they went with Melvin Gordon. Lindsay, I felt I agreed with a lot of his points. He did a radio interview a while back, very angry, where he just said, "What are you giving me the ball to run up the middle for? I'm 170 pounds and it's pointless." And this is the guy coming off 2,000-yard seasons, not one, but two. And we know what he does really well. So it made no sense. To me, it was pretty unfair. If they didn't want to back him, then let him go. Then there was, they were initially put an original round tender on him, which was kind of disrespectful. Then they rescinded that, fortunately, and he's gone to the Texans. So I do have questions around Pat Shurmur. But it is the third year of Vic Fangio. It's Shurmur's second year. It's Drew Lock's third year. You have Noah Fant. You have Jerry Jeudy. You've Cortland Sutton coming back. You've KJ Hamler. The weapons are there. You now have Garrett Bowles, who with the new reffing rules is absolutely phenomenal. You can't get physically, Garrett Bowles did everything you wanted. The issue with him was concentration, but with the way in which they're calling holes, good luck getting around him, because he's just a man mountain. The line should be better set. There are no excuses for the Broncos. If this doesn't work, then I think you are looking at a complete reset in terms of head coach, OC, and QB next year. I really think there can't be anything. This is the longest time since you've to go back to the 68 to 72 to find 4 losing seasons in Broncos history. That's how far back we're talking about. Broncos country is ready for any sort of winning football. If we can get to, and you're probably talking a 17 game season, but if we can win those 9 games, I think fans will be happy. Nobody's expecting a Super Bowl trip, but between what the defense can do and the potential, but it's all on Drew Lock now. It is his team. They've given him the weapons. They've backed him. He's got to produce.
The similarities between the Giants and the Broncos are very consistent and very similar. Like we talked at the start of the show, Daniel Jones, third year, he's got the weapons in place. Like I said to Colum time and time again last season, like Drew Lock, yeah, he's a question mark. I think he's got the potential, but he has the players. Like the Broncos, this is why I think they focus so much on the defense in the offseason and free agent. Because if you look at player for player, they really have great wide receivers. Just they weren't getting it done, and the production levels were so poor last year. But I would expect a rebound from them. But again, the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and I am surprised that Shurmur hasn't done well with Lock, because the one thing he had going from when he was with the Giants, he obviously got sacked in the end because he's not a good head coach, but he was, he did help Daniel Jones in the first year, and Daniel Jones seemed to be progressing in the right direction. So, and he was very strong in Minnesota with an average quarterback, shall we say, at the time. So I'm surprised it hasn't worked out to date, but I would expect a rebound.
Yeah, I'm not mad on Shurmur myself. Obviously, having him being the head coach for a time I'd like to forget. He was, as you said, Brian, that he was a good with the quarterback. He got a lot of work done with him, and we've seen some great things from Daniel Jones when he was the offensive coordinator there. So maybe he can turn it around with Drew Lock, but you would think you would have seen something by now. Personally, I don't think Drew Lock is the guy in the Broncos, unfortunately. I like him. He's young. He's kind of has a little bit of a flashy streak to him sometimes, but I just don't see it. And maybe I'm just looking at Daniel Jones through rose-tinted glasses myself, but that remains to be seen. Again, with the weapons on the Broncos, I like them. I like the wide receivers. The running backs are okay. It is just getting the job done. So, I mean, it's all on Drew Lock for me and the Broncos.
Judy needs to step up this year. Like at the end of last season, there was I think the second last game, Colum, correct me if I'm wrong, away to the last game away to the Chargers. It was a close game in the end, and there was a ball at the end that went up, and he wasn't interested in coming down with it. And I recall saying to Colum afterwards, he just wasn't interested. He wanted to get on the flight, get home. You know, for a first-year player, he flashed, but I would have thought, you know, we would have seen a lot more of him. Even with the inability last year to move the ball as often as he should have, I still felt it when he had his opportunity with the ball, he didn't do enough. Colum might disagree with you.
No, I know. I'd say you're right. Like, he flashed. Like, he had that run, that 92-yard catch and run where he looks unbelievable, and some of his route running is phenomenal. But Drew Lock has to see him. Like, his ability to get free is brilliant, but you know, he has to do better as well on contested catches. The other part I think that's interesting though is Noah Fant, and for him, he to me is the third year player who could really make a jump, because no matter how good a tight end you are coming into the league, tight ends traditionally struggle early on in this league, but his stats are up there on a par with those really elite guys. He was a bit hobbled by injury last year. He had a high ankle sprain early, and he kind of limped through the season. He had moments where he flashed, and he shows up. He certainly has the heart, but he to me is an interesting one, and one who, you know, again, like, there isn't a position you could say that the Broncos don't have somebody. Even Melvin Gordon as a running back is decent and can catch out of the backfield. So there is no position where you look and you go, oh, that's a glaring weakness. There are some, obviously, there are better players around the league, but I think that, to me, it's the head coaching and the play calling just has to be better. But it'll be fascinating, I think, when we're sitting here next year to see, because I think given Washington, the Seahawks, the Giants, and the Broncos all going in with intriguing storylines around them, like the Seahawks, obviously the Russell Wilson piece, what happens, Washington with that kind of unexpected playoff appearance last year, and can they build on that? And the Broncos and the Giants with these two kind of youngish quarterbacks, certainly, and weapons, but questions around, can they actually produce?
Yeah, Fionn, what do you think? You've been quite quiet now during this section.
Unusually
Yeah,
quiet.
I think the guys did a good job. The only thing I can say for Colum is, I guarantee you overpaid for Darby. I had to watch him all season. He's sporadic, let's say. I think, like some of the other guys you have on offense, he can do a decent job. Like you mentioned, it's not a weird signing. You're not looking at it going, Jesus, why are you signing him? But in terms of the money, I think you overpaid for him a little bit. He's going to get burnt. It was one of our big bugaboos as a Washington fan. We were watching the games, waiting for him to get scorched on something, and it's about, if he can put enough good guys around him, he doesn't get scorched enough where he's going to cost you a game if you've got the talent to kind of safety net him a little bit. But then there is that worry of, how often can I leave this guy on an island? And for me, it will be as little as possible, and then he won't do so much damage. But yeah, that's all I really have. I agree with the guys. I agree with their analysis. It's an interesting scenario. I really like Drew Lock. His personality, I think, is good. He has that kind of slight underdog feel to him. I like a battler at quarterback. My experience of Washington quarterbacks, that's always been the problem. A lot of these game managers, which is not a terrible thing, but it's hard to be a fan of them. It's hard to be the guy to watch. There's no flash. There's no enjoyment. It's just kind of pottering along. So at least to give them that. And he has a deep threat. I feel like I don't get to see a whole lot of Denver, but from some of the highlights, it's not like he can't throw a big ball or he can't place that ball right on the sideline. I think as a fan, Colum would admit it's just frustrating not seeing him be able to do that in a consistent basis with the guys that he has around him.
Yeah, it's the processing. I mean, like the arm is there. Like he can throw for he's the Uncle Rico in Colorado. He can throw it over the mountains, but the issue is he doesn't see the field, and so he goes to that first read so often. And when you come up against kind of elite safeties or elite cornerbacks, which you think you get away with it in college, right? You can get away because guys, it's just not as physical. It's that split second off. But in this league, he just gets picked because they telegraph what he's going to do. I think the Sorensen pick last year against the Chiefs, to me, is a perfect, like, you could see a mile away. It was like, don't throw the ball there. And you could see Sorensen coming up behind like a great white that was just, and he took it and he was gone. And the entire stadium, it just kind of felt flat. So it's that processing. Can he do that? He'll have some sort of camp. Let's see.
I don't know if you've just seen that the Eagles have signed Joe Flacco, and Brian, I don't know if you also seen that there's a Kyle Rudolph snag in the medical issue there.
That's why I kind of moved away for a second. Yeah. Breaking news, half the press.
Plus Fiona was talking, so.
Interesting about the Joe Flacco side of things, because the 49ers were interested in him as well. So, I don't know about that now.
He's a weird guy, and I don't know if it's just because I'm a bit young as an NFL fan in terms of the years that I've watched it, but I always felt like he was shy. I know he got to the Super Bowl and did a good job there, but after that, most of the seasons I saw him, he was terrible, and the Ravens way overpaid for him, and I've no idea how he's still in the league.
He looked woeful last year when he had to come in.
He was terrible.
I haven't seen him as a starter in Denver. He is awful. His attitude is terrible. But I can tell you, Fionn, how it happened is it was all about John Fox was the head coach of the Broncos, and he didn't allow Peyton Manning to be Peyton Manning. The Broncos were third and 7 and tried to play it safe, ended up giving the ball back to the Ravens. The Ravens go for this play right towards the end, and live with me forever because those are the plays that drive a dagger through your heart. Raheem Moore totally misjudges the flight of the ball, just gets it all wrong, falls over, and leaves the Ravens to run it in. If it's like, I would genuinely say 99 times out of 100, he's there to just bat it away or to even tackle the guy. But that led to the what happens then is John Fox, super conservative coach, ends up the Broncos take a knee and all of the energy saps out of the stadium. The Ravens win in overtime, and then they go on obviously to win that Super Bowl, and he never did a single thing after that.
It's interesting. It's a very dangerous signing though if you're an Eagles fan, I find, because they got rid of Carson Wentz and obviously they put in Jalen Hurts, and all the reporting that we've seen that they're going to draft another QB this year. Jalen Hurts is not necessarily going to be the number one guy. If you're getting rid of Carson Wentz, you got rid of Doug Peterson and all this, you've got to put him in at number one. You've got to give Hurts the opportunity. And having someone there, and there's no way that Flacco is there to teach Jalen Hurts about playing football, because like you said, Colum, Joe Flacco has got a terrible mentality, and he will not be there to help the young guys. I don't think he helped Sam Darnold once New York, and I don't see it happening there in Philadelphia. But while we've talked about the Eagles, let's move over to the NFC side, because it has been sort of a little quieter on terms of the NFC sides signing players as opposed to the AFC. And I guess probably some of the biggest moves in the NFC have got to be about with the Cardinals, who are living in the year 2016 by signing JJ Watt, Rodney Hudson, and AJ Green. Now I know it was touched on earlier with JJ Watt. Like, are these sort of signings more on reputation?
Yeah. These guys are like, a lot of these guys are over the hill or are often injured, especially AJ Green and JJ Watt. Like, We're not going to see them a lot of the time on the field for Cardinals, but I do think they were good, solid signings. Cardinals obviously have a good, solid wide receiver core. Now they've bolstered it up with AJ Green, who, yeah, we can all admit he lost a step, but he's still AJ Green. So I'd like to think he might still have a bit of ability behind him, maybe some smarts that he can work his body around or something like that. And JJ Watt, for the 14 snaps that we're going to see him in next year, he might be pretty good. He's still going to demand probably double like blocking against them. And then on the other side, you've got his name's
Chandler Jones.
Yeah, Chandler Jones. So it's still going to be it's better than having Chandler Jones and not JJ Watt. So in my opinion, they're decent signings, and like I'd be happy if I was a Cardinals fan.
I think they got Green for a nice price, to be honest. I don't think they overpaid for him. They knew he was old. They knew what they were getting, and I think they got a reasonable price for the guy that he is. And look, if he has a little uptick in production, good. Then they get extra value for money. And if he does have a few injuries or something, they haven't lost a whole lot of money on him. So I think that's worth it. I think they overpaid a little bit for JJ Watt, like you said, just based on his injury history. How much production are you going to get out of him? I think if he's on the pitch, like you said, Jake, he can still do damage. He's still going to get attention, and definitely if you leave him one-on-one, he'll get a few goals at the quarterback. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, definitely looking like they were got mixed up their folders on the computer and were reading the scouting reports from a couple of seasons ago instead of this season.
They strike me as signs that you look at it, and they were close to making the playoffs last year. You know, the week 17, they still had the opportunity. It went in the Bears' favor in terms of the wild card. The kind of players that would come in, a young team, provide the experience, may not necessarily play every game, but you know, players in the locker room are crucial to a team to progress to the next stage. They're on the periphery. Like me and Colum touched this on our show a few weeks ago. I was kind of saying I didn't get the Watt move because Watt was very much coming out with little snippets of information around he wanted to go to a team that was challenging for the Super Bowl. Personally, I don't think the Cardinals will be challenging for the Super Bowl, maybe for a wild card. But he is the kind of player, and AJ Green, that would certainly be, you know, step up and do enough, you know, in terms of being productive enough to help the team make the playoffs. That's why I see that. So I don't think it's more a case of how much football they play. It's more so about what they do in the locker room and help the young team progress to the next stage.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. I actually think, though, in terms of JJ Watt, I think the Cardinals are a decent side, and I think they've brought in character guys in terms of these players, and I think that is huge. I saw it. Say when the Broncos brought in DeMarcus Ware and the impact he had on Von Miller and what that allowed Von Miller to do, and Von hasn't looked the same player since DeMarcus retired. So having guys in and around the locker room, and look, JJ Watt is off the field. Everyone just says what a stand-up guy he is. You have a young head coach there in Arizona, and you have you have a young QB. They have a real talent in Isaiah Simmons if they can figure out how to use him. I have questions around Vance Joseph, but I think they have a Swiss Army knife who is outstanding if they can, and maybe that bringing in JJ Watt kind of helps that. I also think with JJ Watt, and whether you guys might be too young to remember Nash going to the Phoenix Suns, and he went to Nash, or he went there because Arizona, when you're getting older, the climate in Arizona is exactly what you want. You are not getting those sorts of muscle injuries that you can get in other players. It's going to stay warm the whole time around, and yet you're not having to worry about maybe the hurricanes that you would get in Houston or anything like that. So to me, it makes a lot of sense for a guy like JJ Watt who does have injury issues, that you want to stay in that warm climate, and that you can help really, that the pieces are in place, and I think it can help build it. His other choice, he could have gone to Cleveland, and there's a better team, I think, in the Browns there, but then he's got to deal with the climate in Cleveland. That is not going to be fun when you've had the number of surgeries and stuff he's had, and you're waking up with aching joints in your knee. No, give me Arizona any day of the week, and the opportunity to maybe play with Larry Fitz if he comes back. I take it.
Derek, Colum has a soft spot for Arizona because he spent a couple of Christmases there. He did, would you believe?
I did.
Oh, right. Okay. I couldn't tell from the way you spoke about the team itself. But, it seems as though you're talking with JJ Watt in terms of a warm weather climate, like how Tom Brady went to Tampa. He liked to wake up with the weather warm because he spent enough time waking up when the weather was cold. Well, JJ is always woken up when the weather was warm because he was in Houston beforehand. Sorry, Field.
Another guy who might have done that jumped out at me when I was doing a bit of research for the show was Ngakoue for Las Vegas. Definitely as a guy, like the Baltimore Ravens were big on this guy. They wanted to re-sign him. They just couldn't afford all their guys. He ends up in Las Vegas, which don't look like they're going to be a competitor anytime soon. So that could be another guy who's gone, oh, I'd love to live in Las Vegas for a while. Let's go there. And they're going to pay me the money that I want. So I think I might put my desire for a ring on hold and go and do a few games of roulette or something while I'm waiting for the season to start.
Why do you think John Brown of the Bills took the first contract that was offered? Oh, Vegas. Okay. Where do I sign?
Yeah, I mean the Raiders they're a bit of a mess. Like they're what are they do? The plan just doesn't seem to be in place. I mean, we talked about Flacco benefiting off a one Super Bowl and it kind of falling into his lap. Well, Gruden ended up getting traded to the Bucs, had that team in place, and wins the Super Bowl. But what has he done since, other than absolutely dismantle the Raiders, which as a Broncos fan has been wonderful to watch. Don't get me wrong, like that 10-year deal is fantastic. But like, look, the Raiders are a storied franchise, even if they've moved again. And I cannot make head nor tails of why would you blow up the line, in particular, which was really good. Like that wasn't your issue. So to me, Ngakoue going there, he is a very good player. He doesn't tend to stay for very long, but he is a good player. But their other moves are absolute head scratchers.
Well, I'll give you a reason why their line is going, and that is because of one person, and that's Tom Cable. From being a Seahawks fan, I know all too well, Tom Cable does nothing but rub his O-lineman up the wrong way, and they just can't wait to get out of the team after working with him for a year. And that is exactly what you've seen now with the Raiders O-line. It's Trent Brown back to the Patriots, Jackson gone to Seattle, Hudson gone to Carolina. I think the only one that stuck around is actually Richie Incognito, and because he is probably from the same sort of old school as Tom Cable, so that's why he'll stick around for a little bit. But one last team I want to have a look at, guys, just before we wrap up. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about, but the Seattle Seahawks. The Russell Wilson saga is over for this year, you could say, because he's saying "Go Hawks" again in videos, and everyone knows how important that is. And the team are giving him more players. We talked about it. Gabe Jackson is coming onto the O-line. I still think there's going to be more moves there. Chris Carson re-signed. Gerald Everett, I think, is a really sneakily good move to get a tight end. So it looks as though the team are listening to the quarterback and, taking what he says on board and making moves to appease him. And I know, Fionn, that makes you furious, but what have you made about the Seahawks moves so far this offseason?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's makes sense, right? They are trying to address it a little bit and maybe finally listening to GM stroke quarterback Russell Wilson, and maybe that's why he's calmed down a little bit. He's like your little toddler. You finally give him that lollipop and he starts being happy as Larry again. All of a sudden he's not crying anymore. So it'll be interesting to see whether the changes actually make a difference. We did joke about it that they have no first round picks, so the team or the lineup might not be settled yet. You mentioned they might try and trade for some guys if they feel they can get good value. It might not necessarily be first round talent guys. They might kind of try and move around that midfield pack of players that they had. But it'll be definitely interesting to keep an eye on Seattle. I don't think they're finished with moves just yet. Obviously the draft to come, but I think there's going to be some other movement going on before we get to the draft.
Yeah, definitely. I really like bringing back Carson. I thought he deserved to be back in Seattle. I like how he runs and stuff. I don't have a whole lot to say about the other free agent moves on the Seahawks. Letting a few of your players go, I think, might have been a mistake. Should have brought back Shaq Griffin. But we'll have to see how it plays out for them. The draft's going to be tough without that first pick as well.
You say the Wilson situation has gone away. I'd say it's on hold. He's looked at, if you recall the Super Bowl, and he looked fairly peeved in the crowd when Roger Goodell was trying to have a conversation about what he was having for his breakfast, and he didn't seem to have any interest in discussing anything with him. He's looking at Brady on the field, and he's winning the Super Bowl. But Brady does one thing that a lot of quarterbacks don't do in the league. He takes pay cuts, or he reevaluates his money, and he spreads it around to help the team. And as Wilson is coming out with these issues, and he's made it publicly very clear, especially on the Dan Patrick show, about how he feels about the current situation. Yeah, he's never once put himself forward. I can't think he's put his hand forward to reduce that 39 million he's taken a year, which is a significant amount on the cap. So maybe he needs to look at that. I don't think the issue's gone away. Personally, I think he will be moved on next year. And I think come middle of the season, you touched on it earlier, I said Gabe Jackson signed. He's only signed because another one of your players is retired, so it's literally a plug in the hole that's already there. No first round pick. Players are bringing in still doesn't resolve the offensive line. If the offensive line gets resolved, I think they'd come good again. And next year, personally, I think the Rams are a team to watch. Matt Stafford, to me, is a good quarterback. He's been under the radar for a long time. The Lions, he's the kind of quarterback, you'd like to see him in a high-scoring game, but would you have him as your quarterback? I personally, you would have him as your quarterback. And I think going into the Rams, for me, the Rams right now would be the team I'd be looking at potentially going to the Super Bowl. But that's not to say Seattle won't be challenging for the division, but that offensive line still needs work, and there's still a lot of players out there, second-level players that you can sign that can plug holes.
Lads, it's all changed. We have to re-record this whole thing. They're after re-signing Benson Mayowa as we speak. The game has changed. They're going to the Super Bowl.
But I would agree with a lot of what Brian said there. Matt Stafford, just on the Lions are where dreams go to die, and he was just fair play to him because he took a beating, and good to see him go to a team that will challenge. If you watch the Irish NFL show, you will know I have issues with Pete Carroll from his time at USC and running away from a situation that he created himself and then left everyone else to pick up the mess. And he is a very good coach, but he is a very stubborn man. The obviously Russell Wilson, the most pressurized quarterback in the league last year, hit 40 times, didn't exactly like it. Who was second? Justin Herbert. Did Justin Herbert have to make a song and a dance for the Chargers to go out and get him extra protection? No, he didn't. But I think if Russell Wilson hadn't done it, he obviously felt that Pete Carroll was just going to leave him out there. So I think if the hit hadn't been as big as it was going to be and the cap hadn't dropped as much as it did, he'd be out. He'd be gone. I think that it would have been a parting of the ways. I think that it is, clearly there are issues there. It was a coordinated piece. He went on Dan Patrick's show. Suddenly he had a whole rake of people who showed up to talk about his unhappiness, talk about how this had been bubbling, talk about he'd been trying to keep a lid on things, etc., etc. But he will be back, and I think that he'll get on with it next season. Pete Carroll, he's a good coach if I have questions around his morals and ethics, but he is a very good coach, and this no matter who the Seahawks seem to have or don't have, you will be competitive in that division. I just think that that's the case. But it's a really interesting one because you have this what is 33, and you have Pete Carroll who's almost 70. So when we get to next year, the end of whenever the Seahawks season ends, I think the owners are going to maybe look long and hard and say, okay, we have a 33 or 34-year-old QB, we have a 70-year-old head coach. How long is he going to be around for? Do they make changes? It will either be Pete Carroll's last year in Seattle or Russell Wilson's. There's a change coming.
See, Colum, just the one part about that with the owners is obviously the owner Paul Allen passed away a couple of years ago, and his daughter took control, but she is kind of a quiet owner. She wants nothing to do with the limelight and ownership, so she's basically given Pete Carroll ownership of that team Any decision that Pete Carroll wants, she's okay with. So pretty much even now, John Schneider, the GM, is working for Pete Carroll. So anything that Pete Carroll wants at that team, he gets. So if it's going to be like that, there's only going to be one result, and that is Russell Wilson leaving. And I think age is a real factor. That the only reason why Wilson hasn't left is because Pete Carroll obviously said to himself, I'm nearly 70. I am too old to rebuild this team. So we'll have to see what happens this time next year. Maybe they're making amends, but like that, at least we'll have him for one more year and we'll try and make the most of it. And I think that's a perfect place to end the show this week. I'd like to thank our special guests this evening, Colum and Brian, for coming on from the Irish NFL show. Lads, before we go, where can people get the show?
Well, you can find us on both Facebook and Twitter, and we now have a website. So the Irish NFL show, and we actually have will be certainly every Friday night, depending on big moves. We might make various appearances, but keep an eye on, certainly our Twitter account is probably the most active, but you can also find us on Facebook and on our website.
Excellent. That's great, lads. Thanks again for coming on. Hopefully we will speak to you again before the start of the new season. Thanks to Jake and Fiona, as always, for coming on, guys.
Thanks very much for having us.
That is it for the show this week. Once again, if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network. That is where you'll find this podcast each and every week. Also, subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts to get the audio version of the show if you prefer to listen to us while you're on your walk within your 5K, of course. But that's it for this week. Make sure you stay safe, and we'll speak to you again soon.